So your reproductive test. Reproductive test is going to be a third anatomy, male and female, a third physiology, which for this unit was menstruation, and a third developmental embryology. And so what I think I want to do with this review is combine all three of these things so that you can see an overall view of how they all go together. Amr and Cole, please stop playing chess. Although I appreciate didn't have to ask you to get off your phone. I appreciate that, but I want you to review. All right, so let's combine. Let's start by combining anatomy and embryology here. So in the ovary, there are follicles that contain eggs, oocytes, and in the testes, produce and contain sperm. When those combine, that is a process called fertilization. And it's going to occur in the oviduct. Remember that the oviduct is another word for the fallopian tube, and it results in a zygote. And remember that a zygote is one cell. One haploid cell plus one haploid cell equals one diploid cell with a full set of chromosomes. That is going to divide and become an embryo, which is two cells. That's going to divide a couple times and become a morula, the Latin word for mulberry. That undergoes a process called compaction, where those cells bind together with tight junctions to become one entity. It's going to divide more and become a hollow ball of cells called a blastocyst. And it starts off having a membrane around it, still has that zona pellucida around it. Then it's going to undergo a process called hatching, where it emerges from that zona pellucida so that the cells can grow. So now it's a blastocyst without the zona pellucida. And that is going to travel into the endometrium, or excuse me, into the uterus and undergo implantation into the endometrium, which the endometrium has become nice and full of blood vessels prepared for by progesterone. We're going to go over the menstrual hormones in a little bit. There's a couple things that happen immediately after implantation occurs. First of all, you need to know that it's going to begin to form those primordial tissue layers. They're called germ layers. Germ layers. Also, the immediate thing that happens is that it begins to form the placenta. And the placenta immediately begins making a bunch of hormones, and the 3 or 4 that you need to know for this class, you need to know that it's going to make estrogen and progesterone. And the progesterone is going to increase the progesterone levels for the entire pregnancy. It actually doubles the progesterone levels. And when those drop, that's going to stimulate childbirth at the end of pregnancy. For right now, that progesterone is going to help form the mucus plug. And the mucus plug is going to seal the cervix, and the progesterone keeps it replenished. It's constantly refreshed the whole pregnancy. And when a woman loses her mucus plug, that is a sign she is about to go into labor. The other hormones the placenta makes, it's going to make human placental lactogen, and that is going to um, make the mother's insulin receptors more resistant. So I'm going to say desensitizes the mother's insulin receptors to put more glucose in the blood. And if too much of this is made, that can lead to gestational diabetes and macrosomia, which is a big baby. And the last hormone that the placenta makes is human chorionic gonadotropin, HCG. This is going to do a lot of things to support the pregnancy. A big thing it does is it inhibits menstruation, and it is what is detected by a pregnancy test. If you have HCG in your body, you have a placenta in your body. All right. So now we're going to talk about those germ layers. These are going to turn into all the parts of your body. The innermost one is the endoderm, E-N-D-O. Endoderm is going to turn into internal organs, all your digestive organs, urinary organs, your lungs. The mesoderm, M-E-S-O, mesoderm, is going to turn into your more connective type tissues. So that's going to be your circulatory system, your skeletal system, your muscular system, and your outermost germ layer. The outermost germ layer is the ecto, E-C-T-O derm. That's going to turn into the integumentary system and the nervous system, which includes nerves, brain, spinal cord. All right, so all those things begin to divide and develop and specialize into the cells they're going to become. And as the baby grows at 6 weeks, the heartbeat is detected. The heart is not done forming, it's not complete, but it is, those cells are beginning to have a heartbeat. At 8 weeks, it is considered a fetus. At 14 weeks, it already has fingernails and can do things like hiccup and turn its head. At 21 weeks, it's going to be able to grasp. So it can grab its toes, suck its thumb. Also, it's going to have lanugo. Lanugo is fine hair. You need to know that word. The lanugo typically falls off pretty quickly after birth, but it is going to do important work protecting the baby until then. The big milestone at 23 weeks is that the fetus can dream. So it's going to have that REM sleep. At 24 weeks, we have a major milestone because the lungs, for the most part, are functional. And in order for a baby to survive, it doesn't need to have everything complete, but the lungs are very important. That is the one thing, the one main thing that the baby needs in order to be able to survive outside the mother, is have lungs. 28 weeks, it has eyelashes. At 32 weeks, there's a fat layer, very important for temperature regulation and cushioning, protection. Also, 4 of the 5 senses are functional, except smell, which of course requires the baby to be outside exposed to air in order for it to work. and full term is considered 40 weeks. Don't forget that around week 7 is when the eye starts to form. The eye takes 6 months to form. It's one of the longest. It's the organ that it's one of the organs that take the longest to form. Is the eye. All right. Questions over embryology. The one they wouldn't have is smell, because they would need to be exposed to air and air flowing through the nose. So that's not going to happen until they're out of the uterus. Yes, ma'am. Oh, 10 weeks versus 8 weeks. Um, so um, there is a change that happens where it goes from being considered a gestational age versus fetal age. Gestational age is measured from the date of the first day of the last period. But the fetal age is when the fertilization occurs, which is around day 14 or 2 weeks after the date of the first period, right? So at some point during the first trimester, usually at the end of the first trimester, they switch from using the fetal age to the gestational age, and that is what is used to determine the due date of the baby, is not the ovulation date, but the date of the last period. And the reason is because we can't know for sure when fertilization occurred, but we do know the date of the first day of the period. So it gives them a little bit more of an accurate due date to estimate. And if you're asking because you're trying to know for the test, I wouldn't ask you on the test, because it does matter. I would need to be very clear about whether it's fetal age or gestational age. So I'm just not going to put it on there. Yes. Where they're made, HCG is made by the placenta, HPL made by the placenta, estrogen and progesterone made by the placenta. Although I want you to know that estrogens are also made by the follicle, and progesterone is made by the corpus luteum, which we're about to go over in the menstruation. And at the very end, I'll go over all the hormones also. Good questions. Any other questions? All right. Can I flip the page and start menstruation? All right, let's do it. All right, menstruation. So I think there's been some confusion on the graph of the menstrual hormones, because it's confusing. There's lines everywhere. Some are going up, some are going down. And you guys have been telling me, how do I memorize this? It is so hard to understand. Well, my answer to you is, please do not memorize the graph. That is way too confusing. I want you to understand the events that are happening, and then that will help you understand the graph. So I'm going to flip this on you. I'm going to talk about it a little bit differently. Instead of drawing the graph out, I'm going to talk to you about the events behind it. So the first thing I need you to understand is what a follicle and a corpus luteum is. So in the ovary, so this would be an ovary, there are a bunch of follicles with little hopeful eggs inside, about 400 by the time a woman is reproductive age. One of those follicles, the healthiest one, is selected every month to grow, and the hormone that helps it grow is follicle stimulating hormone, which, just like the name tells you, is stimulating the follicle. So follicle stimulating hormone released by the pituitary. So that follicle grows and grows and grows. And then there's a spike in luteinizing hormone, which we'll talk about in a second, that causes it to burst, releasing the egg. This right here, the follicle makes estrogen. So this is really producing and releasing estrogen. Then this structure turns into a new structure, which is the corpus luteum. And I'm drawing it with little circles because it's glandular. It is its main role is at this point is not to protect the egg or grow the egg. At this point, its only role is to produce hormones. It no longer produces estrogens. Now it produces a new hormone, progesterone. And so then that's going to fade and fade and fade. And when that goes away, there's a drop in progesterone, which causes detachment of the endometrium. All right. So let me say all that a different way. So the first thing that's happening is that the follicle, the chosen follicle in the ovary, is growing. So what you would expect to see during this first stage is the FSH levels are going to be high, and as the follicle grows, it makes more and more estrogen. So you would see estrogen and FSH going up. And that's going to be the first half. It's actually called the follicular phase for that reason. Then around day 14, is when the ovulation occurs. And for that, you're going to see a big spike in the pituitary hormone, luteinizing hormone, because that's what makes a follicle burst, and a little spike in FSH to make it grow really big and then burst. Then the follicle turns into the corpus luteum. So it is no longer making estrogen. So you're going to see the estrogen levels drop, and you're going to see a rise in a new hormone, which is made by the corpus luteum. So you're going to see a rise in progesterone. And that is the second half, which is called the luteal phase because of the corpus luteum. So that is what that graph is. Does that help a little bit to understand what's going on there? Like the reasons behind it? All right, now let's talk about the stages that happen. So the first thing that occurs, the first event occurs, that is bleeding. It's preparing the new endometrium. It has to shed the old endometrium. So it's shedding the old endometrium, beginning to prepare the new endometrium. The second thing is that the endometrium is thickening, and the cervical mucus is thinning. And those two things happen because of estrogen. Event number 3 is ovulation. And that occurs because of luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, which are pituitary hormones. And that's how birth control works, is that it creates a negative feedback pathway that prevents the release of LH and FSH, so it prevents ovulation. If there's no egg present to fertilize, then that is going to prevent pregnancy. The fourth event is preparing the endometrium for implantation, filling it with blood vessels, vasculature, so it can provide nutrients for the blastocyst to implant. It's also no longer wants sperm to be present in the uterus, so the cervical mucus is going to thicken. And that all occurs because of the effects of the hormone progesterone. Okay, so far, same thing here that we're seeing up here. The estrogen is high in the first part, progesterone is high in the second, in the last part. All right, the fifth thing that happens is a little bit of a choose your own adventure, because if the egg is unfertilized, something happens different than if the egg is fertilized. So if the egg is unfertilized, then the corpus luteum is going to break down and the endometrium is going to detach. It's called detachment, and it's due to a drop in progesterone. If the egg is fertilized, then implantation will hopefully occur. And when the placenta forms, it's going to cause a rise in progesterone because the placenta begins to make progesterone. It actually doubles the level of progesterone. And that's going to stay high the entire pregnancy. And that, of course, is coming from the placenta. A little bit of a connection to our embryology on the other page. All right, the other hormones that were on there that you need to know are prostaglandins. Prostaglandins are going to be produced by the placenta and the uterus to stimulate uterine contractions during childbirth. They can also be used to stimulate contractions in a patient in order to induce pregnancy, or induce labor. Relaxin is made by the mainly by the ovary, also a little bit by the placenta, to loosen ligaments, especially the ones in the hips. And one thing that could happen if you have a lack of it is dystocia, D-Y-S-T-O-C-I-A, which is a failure of the pelvis to expand, obstructing the baby. We also talked about 3 pituitary hormones. Pituitary is a super cool gland in the brain. It makes a lot of hormones. The 3 for this unit were luteinizing hormone, which causes follicle to burst, follicle stimulating hormone, which causes follicle to grow, and prolactin, which is going to stimulate breast milk production. All right, questions over hormones or menstruation? No questions? All right. Let's talk about birth control. You do not need to memorize all the efficacies of the birth controls, like all the numbers, whether it's 81% or 82%, but you do need to know in general, which ones are most effective, which ones are least effective. You need to know which one prevents STDs. Do you remember which one prevents STDs? Condoms, good. Not all condoms. Some condoms are able to prevent STDs. You need to know the difference between a barrier method and a hormonal method. A barrier is going to physically stop the sperm from fertilizing the egg. So the ones that we talked about were a copper IUD, condom, diaphragm, spermicide, vasectomy, and tubal ligation. Hormonal is going to keep the levels of progesterone and estrogen really high. So it's a negative feedback pathway to the pituitary, so it doesn't release LH and FSH. So it stops ovulation from occurring. So that is anything with hormones in it. So that would be pills, IUD, an implant, patch, the shot, the ring. Overall, the most effective methods are going to be implant or an IUD or a vasectomy. The least effective is which one? Pull-out method. Good. Which doesn't really deserve to be called a birth control method, but it is important to educate you. All right. Now, I just want to quickly review the flow of sperm, flow of an egg, just so we review the anatomy that it goes through. We can also touch on some comparative anatomy between male and female reproductive organs. Can I turn the paper? You done? All right. All right, let's talk about the structures that sperm pass through. So let's do the pathway of sperm. And of course, this would be male anatomy. All right. So sperm are going to be produced and stored in the testes. Then they're going to pass through the epididymis and into the vas deferens. Then on its way to the prostate, which is the next one, it is going to pass by the seminal vesicles. Sperm do not enter the seminal vesicle, but the seminal vesicle is so important because it produces the semen. Sperm is not semen, semen is not sperm. And the important thing to know about that is it contains alkaline ions to protect the semen from the acidic penis and vagina. Also, nutrients such as fructose in order for the mitochondria in the tail of the sperm to make ATP. After the prostate, it travels into the urethra and it passes by but does not enter the Cowper's gland, which adds additional fluids to the semen. For the penile tissues, Which one gets rigid and which one remains pliable? Yep, spongiosum, spongy. Good. The rigid is cavernosum. And pliable is spongiosum. It is going to play a role in keeping the urethra open. Do the urinary systems and reproductive systems meet in the male tract? No. I mean, yes, in the male tract, yes, they meet. Let's write that down. So the urinary and reproductive meet, and in fact, they meet at the prostate. So the prostate is going to do the important job of keeping the urine out of the semen and the semen out of the urine. And this is, of course, in male. All right. Female, pathway of an egg. Oh, yes, ma'am. You do need to know the basic anatomy of a sperm. So the sperm would be the head, the midpiece, and the tail. And the important thing about the head is that it contains so this would be the head. It contains the DNA, and you need to know it's only 23 chromosomes because it's haploid. The tip is called the acrosome, which is important because it has the enzymes that penetrate the zona pellucida. The midpiece and the tail have mitochondria for motility or movement. The midpiece and tail fall off upon fertilization, so no mitochondria from the father end up in the zygote. It is only mitochondrial DNA from the mother, maternal DNA. All right, and we'll do the pathway of an egg. So pathway of an egg, oocyte, and of course this is female. So it's going to be made and stored in the ovary. Then remember, it's tricky because it goes into the abdominal cavity. Do you remember that? Then it goes into the fimbriae. Then into the oviduct, also called the fallopian tube. Then the uterus. And if it is shed, then technically through the cervix and then vagina. How long does a unfertilized oocyte live? 12 to 24 hours. Yeah, no more than 24 hours, so not very long. And then some comparative anatomy or analogous structures. So in male versus in female. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. All right, so analogous structures. The vas deferens. What would the vas deferens be? The oviduct, good. What would the epididymis be? The epididymis was the fimbriae. Okay, what were the testes? They were ovaries, good. What was the scrotum? Labia majora, good. Here's a tricky one. What was the urethra? Urethra. The corpus cavernosum. Clitoris. The prostate. was the uterus and Skene's gland. And then it's not reproductive, but what about the bladder? Bladder was a bladder. Good. And the important thing to know in general about the female reproductive is that the female urinary and reproductive systems do not meet. They stay separate. All right. Any questions about that?